Okay, I think we're going to get started. Hi, everyone. I'm Nicolette Scott. I am a strategic partner manager at YouTube. I work on our news team at YouTube with our largest digital publishers and independent journalists. And I'm really excited to be here today to speak to you about elections because we are in an election year. And when we look at actually the entire world this year, 50% of the countries are going to actually be having elections. So hopefully this content will be helpful for everyone as you think about covering the election. We're going to focus on some best practices. We'll share some examples so that you can really think about your holistic video strategy for the election. So as I mentioned, 2024 is going to be, it's actually the biggest global election year in history. More than 60 countries representing half the world's population will go to the polls in 2024. And YouTube's global reach and scale offer a unique opportunity to drive awareness, engagement, and revenue, of course. So as you may have heard us share in the past, YouTube actually has over 2 billion monthly logged in viewers. And in addition, we see 300 million live viewers, so live stream viewers, log in daily on YouTube. So during an election cycle, live stream is a fantastic way to really reach a captive audience. We also now have over 70 billion daily shorts views globally. So I don't know if anyone here has already experimented with shorts, but shorts are another really great strategy to keep in mind when you're trying to reach younger audiences and new audiences. So that's been growing rapidly. And then as I shared, 50% of the world will have a major election. So reach is even more critical during an election cycle because there's a big opportunity to connect people to trustworthy, high quality election news and information on YouTube, given our scale that we just discussed. And we know that funding this coverage is really critical. So we want to ensure that people are connecting with credible sources to help them make informed decisions. So when we think about our news efforts more generally on YouTube, not just supporting the election cycle, but more broadly, we want to help you reach new audiences, build sustainable businesses, and then also foster informed viewership. And so before we really dive into the elections content strategy, I just wanted to take you through some of the ways that we're focused on the broader ecosystem. And enhanced discovery is really the key cornerstone of our efforts in news. So hopefully everyone is familiar with our breaking news on the homepage. When a breaking news moment happens, we want to ensure that authoritative sources can quickly and easily reach audiences with the latest information. And one of the ways that we've done this is really by creating this breaking news shelf. It appears directly on the homepage. It features news events of national importance from authoritative sources. And we've launched this feature in over 40 markets to date. We also know that audiences proactively look for news during an election, and we want to help make sure that news organizations can connect them with authoritative information. The top news shelf on the search page continues to be critical in allowing news channels to connect with audiences that are interested in learning about specific topics by raising relevant results from authoritative voices. And lastly, we have the top news on the homepage to enable viewers to find the top news stories as they browse the content. And then this is our most exciting and latest product launch is the News Watch page. So I don't know, has anyone seen this come up, the News Watch page? Because this is new as of 2023. It's an immersive experience for news stories on YouTube, and it pulls together content from authoritative sources across several formats. So whether that be video on demand, live streams, podcasts, and shorts. And it really allows you to kind of go deeper. If you're watching a news story, you can kind of go deeper into that story, whether it's historical context or explainers or additional information. So it's an ability to deep dive across multiple sources and angles. We're currently live with this feature in 41 regions globally, and we'll continue to invest to bring more formats and information to this feature to aid viewers. Okay, so that's a little bit of a background on how we approach news on YouTube. Next, we're going to talk about content strategy for elections. So hopefully this is a relevant topic for all of you in the room, but you might be wondering, how can we really prepare for the elections? We know this is a really big opportunity from a coverage perspective. So we really want to focus on 3 main strategies for successful election coverage. So the first is the responsibility aspect. So building a responsible platform. We at YouTube care deeply about responsibility and our commitment to both the viewer, advertisers, creators, society. We want to make sure we're doing what's right for everyone. So as part of that, we remove and reduce harmful content. We raise reliable sources, and we want to reward and empower responsible, authoritative creators. That's really kind of at the heart of everything that we do. But we also want you to think about leveraging our full suite of products and strategies. So we talk a lot at YouTube about multi-format strategy. And what that really means is thinking about really multiple content types and covering, through different formats, whether it's video on demand, long form content, shorts, live stream, podcasting content. We've designed our platform to really reach audiences throughout these variant moments and content types. So we're going to talk a little bit about how you can evolve your channel to really be dedicated to election coverage through multi-format strategy. And then the last piece that's really critical for elections is understanding the rules of the road. So you want to understand the community guidelines, you want to understand copyright, and you want to understand our ad-friendly rules. All of this can be found on our website. And if you have questions, you can definitely ask me after. But this is also really critical with a sensitive topic like elections. Okay, so as I mentioned, YouTube really is the only place where you can access multiple formats of content. You can connect, you can educate, you can reach new audiences. When you think about creating content for the election, you want to really think about all of the different formats and how you can think about your channel as kind of a hub for elections content. So you want to take advantage of all of these because they do truly work together, and it will allow you to reach the most audiences across different age brackets, across, different moments throughout their day. So obviously video on demand, VOD, is kind of the bread and butter. You want to transform your channel into an elections hub and really make that a place for all your long form content. Think about evergreen content, educational explainers, analysis, anything that's longer form. For live stream, as I mentioned, there's a lot of opportunity with live streaming, especially during elections. Live stream can help you attract new audiences and new subscribers. It will provide real-time information and analysis to your audience. Shorts are really great to grow and reach new audiences through short form. So think about clippable, bite-sized pieces of content that are lighter and quicker. And then podcasting, you can deepen engagement and education through this lean back experience, whether it's audio only or an audio and video format. And then when we think about covering the election, it's really an opportunity to cover the entire cycle. So this is actually something that I've told partners: when you're covering elections, it's not necessarily just election day. It goes beyond election day. It starts way before election day, right? The pre-election cycle is really an opportunity for voter education. So think about ways that you can cover candidate profiles. We talk about compilations, and I'll show an example. Explainers are incredibly important and valuable in covering, kind of pre-voter education, candidate interviews, et cetera. But it's really a time for you to answer questions, provide in-depth candidate profiles, leverage weekly recaps. You can also, again, build an audience during this time and have them kind of following along throughout the entire election cycle. When we think about peak election season, it's when you can really lean heavily into the campaign coverage. That's the point where you might want to say, like, you're interviewing candidates, you're maybe hosting or live streaming town halls, you're doing political analysis through podcasting. And then by the time election day rolls around, think about how you can really engage your community, whether that's through the community tab, community posts, live stream coverage, again, to share election results in real time if you have access to that footage. And then post-election, again, it's just because the election has happened, now is an opportunity to educate viewers around, analysis, clips of speeches, broadcast clips. Continue to support your viewers with relevant context and even implications of election results, so that they feel like there's still education. So impact on policy, expert analysis, public figure reactions, winners and losers, all of these things are super important. And again, you want to remember, as you build out this election hub, brand your channel with banners, rebrand avatars to share your social links. We often encourage partners to Share all of your other social media like through YouTube and do the same on your other social channels for YouTube. So there's a really like an effort kind of across platform. Thumbnails and titles are really important and they're greater than the sum of their parts. So they work really well when you kind of optimize together, kindle curiosity, share a sneak peek, attract viewers to your video, and then think about creating an elections playlist. So this is something that's really simple that you can do on your homepage. But if you're going to start covering the election, create a playlist and put it kind of toward the top of your page. And then the last tip is just to set up two-factor authentication on your channel to just prevent any hijacking. Okay, so now we're going to actually take a closer look at each of the formats. This is kind of the most fun part of the presentation because we're going to actually look at examples of other partners that have done this really well across the globe. So let's first start by looking at video on demand and the things that you can keep in mind when you're covering an election. So the first one's actually pretty important when you think about the amount of content on our platform on YouTube. And each year we've just seen that there's more and more content creators that are joining, like people are leaning in, more than ever before, really. So there's a lot of optionality for viewers. So you want to be different. You want to think about how you can present the content in a way that's unique, differentiate your content to stand out, because as you might imagine, if you are searching for something on a candidate or elections results, all of the search results are probably going to look really similar because they're all covering the same thing. So how can you really stand out? Be engaging. Think about the combination of your titles and your thumbnails. Like I mentioned, you want to create really like a teaser for the content, but of course you don't want to be clickbait. You want to make sure you're delivering on what you're presenting, but it's really important to kind of create a curiosity gap. You want to be educational and make sure that you're following our community guidelines. In some cases, that might require you to provide additional EDSA context if necessary. So EDSA is what allows certain types of content to remain on the platform. If it's due to like education, documentary, science, or art. You want to cover the entire cycle. So that means, in the US, election day does not end with November 5th. Think about how you can add value and inform viewers throughout the year. And then this is a really big one for 2024. Focus on creating content for the living room. So TV is actually our fastest growing screen. And we find that in general, there's a lot of co-viewership happening in the living room. YouTube's actually like the #1 streamer ahead of Netflix and Hulu, which is really exciting. So think about creating content that's engaging, HD quality, longer form content. And then for partners who might have access to broadcast content, so like if you have a nightly news channel, consider uploading the full episodes during the election season to kind of bring more accessibility to your content for viewers that don't necessarily have, access to TV. Okay, so I want to share some examples of pre-election examples. So we mentioned some of these before, but candidate profiles, really, really great opportunity to provide education and context on who the candidates are that people will be voting for. This is an example from the Associated Press. They actually did a presidential candidate deep dive across all of the candidates. This example in particular was a profile of former governor of South Carolina and Republican U.S. presidential candidate Nikki Haley. It was a longer form piece. It was part of a series, as I mentioned, and they did one for every candidate. Weekly recaps can also be really helpful. This is an example from TLDR News out of the UK. And you can see here that they basically are recapping the elections in Finland, Bulgaria, and Montenegro. And it was basically an explainer recap of what happened during those elections. And then the last example, I'm going to show a clip, but you're not going to have sound, unfortunately, but I just want you to see our compilations, and I'll just voice over this. So this is a piece from the New York Times that took a look at the Trump presidency in 6 minutes, and they actually just took clips that were relevant and compiled this 6-minute video that really highlighted the entire presidency over 4 years in 6 minutes. It's very well done, and you can see really kind of the beauty of the work here is in the editing and being able to kind of put together this compilation. We've seen actually compilations have been taking off due to the fact that more people are watching on their TV screens. So even if you have longer form content, like an hour-long marathon of content that you can string together, we're finding that there is a desire for viewers who actually want to watch that type of longer form content on their TV screens. And so compilations are a great way to kind of give like a nice kind of rounded out viewership experience for, pre-election education. And then the explainer format. So explainers are a really strong format for video on demand, so much so that we gave it its own slide because we couldn't just give you one example of an explainer. YouTube is, after all, the #2 search engine following google.com. So people come to YouTube to understand, to learn, to educate themselves. We also find sometimes people come to ask questions that they don't feel comfortable asking friends and family. So they might come to YouTube because they actually don't understand, how does the election process work? Or how do they count ballots? Or, in this case, this is an example from Al Jazeera, US elections explained, how do Americans pick the president? So questions that might seem basic, but people might not know the answer to, and they don't want to necessarily ask people, they'll come to YouTube for that. And so there's an opportunity to cover policy, to explain, for example, this is an example from Vox that talks about how a case gets to the Supreme Court. So talking about kind of the US policies there, procedural explainers around the election, how things are done, how ballots are counted, how does the Electoral College work? And then candidate explainers, again, really important. These are a little bit different from the candidate profiles because they go more in detail to their policies and how they're, preparing and thinking for the election. And I'll show you this example from Vox. Does it go? To give you a sense of how they covered, they looked at Brazil's Lula da Silva, and they did a really nice long form explainer video to talk about the candidates. And again, kind of compilation and wonderful video editing to kind of give viewers an understanding. And then they have some graphics in here as well that talk about his policies, kind of insight into that candidate. Okay. Then as we move into peak election season, there really are a variety of ways to approach authoritative elections coverage. And what I really love about this slide is it's very diverse. So all of these partners were covering the election, but you have, to the far right, Root actually did this wonderful series of candidate interviews that I don't have an example here to play, but it was literally each candidate was filming themselves, answering questions from viewers. So viewers wrote in with their questions, and then the candidate basically got on to a Zoom and just addressed all of their questions. So incredibly effective, but not incredibly resource heavy. Then you have other partners I think this is from The Guardian, where they just hosted, and live streamed debates or town halls. And then the last example are podcasts. So we've actually found podcasts this year, in addition to Living Room, are another really big format that we're going to see a lot of momentum around. And so I just want to share this one example just to show you that you can even create something in your bedroom for YouTube. So this is a podcast that is actually operated by ABC. It's called 538. It's a political podcast, and they have 4 people that really kind of speak through the issues of our time. Incredibly valuable during peak election season as we think about, the different policies, the candidates, how one is going to be impacted versus the other. This is a really great example to take a look at. And this was focused on, will politics or policy win out at the border? And then post-election. So we talked a little bit about this. There are, again, a lot of ways to kind of approach post-election. The most obvious is obviously the election results, being able to share, okay, who won, for people to kind of come and learn and find that information, but also highlighting, moments from the campaign trail, victory speeches, and then reporting analysis is another one that's really, I think, helpful, again, for educational purposes to kind of understand implications of who. I'll actually play a clip from this for you to see, but, to show who are the people that were voting in this Republican primary, kind of looking at the analysis and not just the results. Oops. Okay, so that's video on demand. Now, the next format, as I mentioned before, are shorts. So shorts, I shared at the top, over 70 million daily views. It's one of our, again, another really fast growing product, a lot of momentum over the last couple of years. So when you're creating news shorts in particular, all of this applies to both the election, but also news more broadly. These are what we found to be the best practices for success and performance in generating a lot of viewership on shorts. And this all came out of an in-depth analysis that we did across the global top performing shorts. So it's all data-driven insights. They're very basic insights, but incredibly, incredibly important. So when you look at the top performing shorts, you'll notice a couple of things that they all have in mind, that they all keep in mind. The first are usually including dates. So this is really important because it helps to inform viewers and avoid misinformation and provides context. And the example I always give is there were, some forest fires that were happening. And can you imagine watching that short and thinking that that's happening in your area in real time when it was something that happened 2 months ago, right? So like that can cause alarm and misinformation, not giving proper context. So you want to have the date of something. The second that's actually really important is text over video. So comprehension is obviously critical. Shorts are a very different experience than video on demand. Video on demand, people are coming, they're really leaned in, they're watching sound on. Shorts, people are actually scrolling through the shorts feed. They might not have sound on. And so they are going to be more likely to continue watching your short if they're able to kind of follow along and have that comprehension. So you want to really like burn in the text into the video. And you'll notice that across a lot of the shorts that you see on the platform. And then it's the next best practice is intriguing intro and titles. So again, you have a very short period of time before they're going to swipe away. You want to make sure that you pay attention to the first couple of seconds. Titles can really help you do this. Again, we talked about like creating a curiosity gap. I've seen a lot of partners have success with like questions as the title. So like an example could be like, why is the US so slow at counting ballots? That's a real short from Bloomberg Quick Takes. It's a question that they then answer in the short. So think about ways that you can kind of engage and create this interest. And then the last two are really specific to kind of vertical video, lean into trends and graphics. So you can think of ways to be creative on shorts. You can experiment. An amazing example is the Washington Post Shorts channel. They launched a separate channel just for their shorts that are geared towards Gen Z audiences. They use like a lot of humor and graphics and things that you wouldn't necessarily think would be used when reporting on the news, but it's been incredibly effective and great to see how they've grown that younger audience. And then the last is to be mindful of the attention span. So shorts are meant to be short. People can consume a lot more content in the same amount of time, which is great because you can attract new audiences, but you want to be mindful of their attention span. So you want to get right to the point. Do not try to like tackle many things in one short. Really try to focus on one topic at a time and just be pithy. Okay, so for election shorts, there are different ways that you can kind of think about this. I think the most obvious are definitely going to be clips, snippets. So these can be podcast clips. They could be interview snippets, or they can also be condensed stories. I think the last one we don't have access to, but the last example is actually one that is 45 seconds long. And it was Liz Truss 45 days in office in 45 seconds. And each second was like a different day that she was in office. It's really well done. So thinking about ways that you can kind of consolidate, again, similar to what we saw with the compilations, like condensing things down into 60 seconds or less. And then other formats that kind of extend outside of just, just traditional news formats, more specific for elections. Mini explainers continue to be really popular. I would say like YouTube in general is really a strong place for explainers, given the fact that we talked about people come looking for information and answers to questions, but also fact checks. Fact checks, I think, are going to be really critical in all of the elections that are happening globally, and definitely like an underutilized format, but incredibly important. This is an example from Verify. And then the last one is reactions to key election moments. So people do want to hear personal reactions and viewpoints. And we talked, some of the earlier sessions again today talked about how people really like to get their news and information from other people. So having reactions to key election moments are also a great way to like have a personality in front of the camera, and to leverage that as well for your channel. And then moving into live stream. So again, things to keep in mind for live stream, super important. This is, if anyone here is planning on doing any sort of live stream, these are kind of like the best practices that you definitely want to keep in mind. You want to schedule a public stream at least 2 days ahead of time so that YouTube can start to like recommend the stream to potential viewers who can then choose the notify me option. You want to start early for a tentpole moment, like if you're live streaming a debate or something like that, 30 to 60 minutes early with a pre-show. You want to customize thumbnails and create a compelling title for the stream. You want to leverage live redirect. If you have multiple streams running simultaneously, you can kind of redirect from one to another. And then amplify your stream via other social platforms. So like I mentioned earlier, you know, video on demand is also it can also be clipped out for viewers to watch later, but think about other platforms that you might want to promote your stream, and then embed your stream on your O&O properties as well to boost viewership. And then when we think about different ways that you can use live stream, so obviously there's the always on feature. If you come from a broadcast network and you want to leverage your existing linear or fast stream on YouTube, you can definitely do that to increase reach and build audiences via additional formats, but also event coverage. So like there's so much that you can cover with an election. Having consistent live coverage will be really a nice complement to the other formats that you're leveraging. And of course, debates and speeches. These are tentpole moments throughout the election cycle and should definitely be covered if you have access to them with live. And we don't have to get too into the weeds, but there are definitely monetization tools that you can think about, some that require, you know, SCUDdy markers and encoders, and some that do not, to really leverage YouTube's live control room to help you with monetization and ad placement. And as I mentioned, after you live, think about clipping and cutting down for video on demand as well. I want to make sure we have time for the case studies because these are really fun and interesting. So French news creators actually did something pretty different with their series to inform voters. So here are two French news creators who actually took a different approach where Hugo Decrypt had 10 in-depth interviews with the candidates. He had over 50 million views across all platforms on these. He did 12 program summaries and was regularly kind of posting election comments on his daily news recap. And these are some of the examples here. And then Gaspard G is another French creator. He did these like deep dives called The Story Of, where he actually looked at 5 candidates' life stories and then did 4 candidate interviews and similarly like 5-minute summaries of programs. So these are definitely like more modern kind of like next gen approaches to covering an election that you wouldn't normally see, but they were very successful, performed well, and had a lot of viewership. And then the other example, looking at a broadcaster kind of on the flip side, who also took kind of a more innovative approach, is actually MSNBC. So they have a multi-pronged approach to election coverage. What I really love about this example is they took insights that they had from viewership. So there was a lot of commentary on like Kornacki, one of their like the Kornacki cam, one of the reporters, and they would always make comments about like Kornacki's khakis during the YouTube live stream of the 2022 midterms. So they actually created this like camera that followed him around called the Kornacki cam. I think I can play it. And it's basically like a cam that like follows him because there was so much like online commentary how he was wearing khaki pants. So they basically just watched him kind of doing his thing, kind of giving just like this other insight into like what goes on in the room. And then they followed up with another strategy. So this was basically taking an insight from linear TV that then they put on YouTube. They then also created digital first live streams featuring Jen Psaki and her co-hosts. And so they like actually would like break down the results, and I'll see if I can play this here. So she basically would go live after the results and do like a post game, similar to the way they do it in sports, where she would have guests come. And then she also, one of the guests that she had was actually a YouTuber. So kind of the final piece of this was they had this independent YouTuber, Brian Tyler Cohen, actually help kind of cover some of the election stuff. So he was a guest on her show. And it was a really clever way to draw some of Brian's 2.5 million subs to the MSNBC channel. So there he is. And you could see here as well on the bottom, there's an example. So there's a lot of creative ways that you can kind of take what you're doing on linear television and bring it to YouTube and kind of cross-pollinate, so to speak. And so this was a very successful kind of multi-prong approach to how they're thinking about election coverage. Okay. So just a really quick recap. The first is responsibility. Obviously, without the responsibility framework, we would not be able to support elections or support our partners kind of holistically. So that's really kind of like the first like checkpoint that's important as you're thinking about covering an election. The second are leveraging YouTube's suite of products and strategies. So make your channel an elections hub, invest in your live strategy if you can, create shorts, expand into podcasts. Even if you can't cover every single format and you were to just add shorts, that would be a really big win, I think, for your channel for this year's election. And then understand and know the rules of the road, stay up to speed with the community guidelines, copyright rules, and the policies so that you understand kind of how the platform works. If you do all of these things, I'm confident that you will be able to cover the election in a really authoritative way and also grow your viewership and reach new audiences. So that is the end of the presentation. Before I wrap, I just want to also share that we do have a microsite that has a lot of additional learning. We're working on getting this exact presentation will be uploaded actually to the microsite. So if you liked what you saw and you want to watch it again, we'll also have a little section on the responsibility piece, so on copyright and all of our rules and policies. So that will be launching in the next couple of months. So if you can scan the QR code and connect with us, we would love to have you kind of visit our site. We also have information on different updates and programs and how we can work together to really support a thriving news industry. So I look forward to connecting with everyone, and I think we'll go to questions.
Thank you very much. My question is related to Spanish people, because in our countries, Mexico and Venezuela also, we are going to have election this year, the next month, and I would like to know something. First, I read about the Instagram changed the algorithm in order to avoid the people have political information. I would like to know what is happening in YouTube, if you have any change of this kind of, and how easy it is for people to find information in Spanish, because I mean, you have elections in English, but in Spanish you have a hashtag, I don't know how the word that people can reach the information.
Yeah, so that's a great question. Sorry, your first question, was it another platform you said changed their algorithm? Yeah. Which one? Instagram. Oh, Instagram. Yeah, so I can't really obviously comment on Meta and the way they're approaching news, but what I can tell you is on the YouTube side, we're actually doubling down on news and investing more in the products to really raise the credible information when it comes to not just elections, but any sort of breaking news event. So the products that I started with are really our investment in the news ecosystem in the space on the problem. So we're definitely not shying away from supporting and elevating and investing in the news space. In terms of the algorithm, because I get this question a lot, there is no like manual actions that are taken by the algorithm or by our policies. We don't punish creators for publishing any sort of type of content. What we do though is we have our policies that are pretty clear. They're outlined on our, help center articles around our community guidelines. But providing that you're following the community guidelines, that you're aware of, how monetization works and advertiser friendly guidelines, like you should be able to see that your content is reaching the right viewers. Your question with respect to Spanish, what I can say is depending on where the person is searching and what their location is, like that should definitely not prevent them from finding the right information. We have a lot of partners that are actually using multi-language audio and dubbing. So a lot of American, like English first partners are actually dubbing the content in Spanish. And we have some tools that are rolling out with a product called Aloud that uses AI to actually allow partners to do this for free so that they can dub the content in Spanish. So like the American content will be available in other languages. So I think that's part of the effort to really kind of make the content accessible to everyone. But if you're in a Spanish speaking country, like you should be able to find whatever content you're looking for in your language. I think your question is probably more with respect to like American or other like non-Spanish speaking countries that are producing content on some of the, like the example that we had from Vox. And so I think that's where the multi-language audio is going to be really critical in the next couple of years. And we're investing in that space as well. Yeah.
What are the most common You've mentioned community guidelines a few times, and I'm wondering what are the most common mistakes that you see that will have a negative impact on your content?
Yeah, so I actually have a slide that just talks a little bit about community guidelines. So community guidelines basically tell you what is allowed and what's not allowed on the platform. We also have, actually, I'll go back a slide. So we also have ad-friendly guidelines, which is more specific to monetization. So is there content that advertisers don't feel comfortable running ads against, which is specific to monetization? But community guidelines are the policies that really apply to all YouTube content. It doesn't matter if you're an independent creator or a large media organization. It's what you can and cannot do on YouTube. And you could see we have like a strike system. So there's like first violation, first strike, second strike, third strike. But I would say like you can take a look. There's like a full list of our community guidelines online if you search for it. But a lot of this stuff is actually like pretty obvious in terms of, you know, content that's just not appropriate. So like I'll use an example of like violence is one that we don't want to encourage people posting violence. That said, I mentioned this before, we have a policy that's known as EDSA, which is educational, documentary, science, and art. There are certain instances where if you are calling out and providing that EDSA context and saying like, this is like news coverage of a war, it might be graphic, like we will allow that content to remain on the platform because it's educational, it's important. You have to say it very explicitly. Yeah. So I think on our community guidelines page, it probably references this EDSA context. Another example would be misinformation. So if there's a misinformation policy, you can publish a video of someone that's saying something that's misinformation if you call out explicitly in the video that like, you know, this is not accurate information, but like we're showing you because we want to educate you on like what's going on. A really like easy example to understand this is actually there was like a Blurred Lines music video years ago. I think it was like, I don't know, back in like 2009 or something like that. And there was nudity in the video. I don't know who's familiar with this video, Blurred Lines, but we made the decision to allow the nudity, which we normally do not allow nudity. So it's like violence, nudity, you know, part of our community guidelines. We don't allow nudity generally, but because this video was artistic, there was like the EDSA piece to it. They allowed the video to stay up because it was part of the art of the video. So that's just an example of like how you can kind of get around some of those policies.
Where do you specify that?
You have to say it out verbally in the video and also like, or you can call it out in like the description. It has to be very explicit. If it's violative, if it's violating community guidelines, because otherwise we wouldn't be able to have videos, you know, showing war crime and stuff like that. And we want to be able to educate and bring that content to the platform, but you have to just be very explicit.
There's a question for you in the chat.
Yes.
From at Claudia Noriel MX. Although podcast is classified as on-demand video, is a different format. Have you noticed specific insights to keep in mind when planning this kind of content?
So the question is around podcasts, like full video on demand podcasts versus audio only, or?
Yeah.
So the best practice I would say is you do want to tag your podcast, even if it's video on demand, as a podcast and put it into a playlist as a podcast. That way people will be able to view the video visually. If you have the full video, that's great. I mean, YouTube's a great place for people to come and watch podcasts, but they also will have listening experiences on YouTube Music now that there's that integration. So as long as you tag it, whether it's a video or not, tag it as a podcast, put it into the playlist, it will be picked up into both. And that would be like the recommendation. Another quick recommendation on podcasts is you definitely want to keep them on your main channel as a playlist. We don't recommend starting a new channel for a podcast because in terms of like viewership and reach and growing that reach, it's way more effective to just keep it on the main channel. And we have basically tabs now on your YouTube channel that will allow people to kind of like look for podcasts or live or videos or shorts. So we've like done that intentionally for you to organize your channel as a multi-format channel. So there's no need to create like separate channels for shorts or separate channels for podcasts, assuming that the audience is the same. And the exception would be the Washington Post Shorts channel, where they are actually taking a very different strategy to reach much younger audiences on their shorts channel. And then they have shorts on their Washington Post channel as well, but they skew a little bit older. Yeah.
So earlier you were saying that YouTube will like rank authoritative sources. So I'm just curious about how that like ranking happens, and like, is it on a local level? So like if we're like a regional paper, are we going to rank like in the Dallas area? And like, how does YouTube determine that?
I think, is your question about the,
Yeah, you were talking about like the breaking news tab and
shelves,
how,
yeah.
yeah, like how those get
yeah, so we actually
populated.
don't rank channels, but basically those shelves will pull in authoritative content.
Yeah, I guess my question is like, how do you determine like what is authoritative content? Like, how does YouTube determine that?
Yeah, so there are a lot of signals that we obviously like take into account. And it is like dynamic and evolving. So there is obviously potential if you have a local news channel that's covering something happening locally, and that's the most authoritative reporting, that it can very possibly show up in that shelf. Yeah.
I wanted to ask about the community tab. I feel like you talk a lot about the different formats, and I know I work at Business Insider, and I feel like
Oh.
yeah, I've met you before.
Yeah.
And we have been, I guess, testing, sharing content on the community tab. And I just wondered if you had any like insight on that.
Yeah, and I don't know if you were able to catch the panel earlier with some of the creators. That's his Sam spoke about this a little bit. So we really encourage you to use the community tab. I think it's like one of the most like underutilized products that we have, because it is really an opportunity to engage with the audience and kind of like keep a dialogue going kind of like repeatedly. So I think it's definitely around the election. It's a great opportunity. Obviously, you can't cover everything. Business Insider is a really good example. Like, my guess is you're not going to live stream the elections results. You're not going to live stream the debates, but you can talk about them on your community tab. And that would be my recommendation. So actually, if we go back to this other slide, when we look at like the cycle, I think we're going to be kind of, but when you look at the cycle, like you can cover basically the whole cycle through both your content strategy through video and also on your community tab. So like if you can't necessarily post results, like I encourage everyone to like use the community tab to do that, so that you can kind of still be present throughout each of these moments. But if there are other questions, I'll stick around for a few minutes outside, but thank you so much for your time, and I hope this was helpful. And please connect with us. Like, I'll go back to that. I'll leave this other slide up for you to connect with our microsite and check it out. It's news.youtube as well. There you go. Thank you.